Welcome to this edition of our live stream. We're coming to you from the Huckabee Theater in Hendersonville, just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where we do the Huckabee Show every week. And in fact, we're taping a show tonight. It'll be aired next weekend. We taped one last night that'll be aired this weekend. Don't worry if you don't figure all that stuff out. We don't understand it either. I just know that come Saturday and Sunday, the Huckabee Show will air on TBN, and we hope you'll be watching. Senior producer for the show, Pam Case, is with me as she is on our live streams. Pam, hope you've had a good week.
I have. Excellent. And I always have to say, what I love about our show is always fresh content. So even though we're taping a little early this week, Gov, we've got fresh content every week.
You know, sometimes I've been asked, how many shows a year do you do? And I say 52. And
Absolutely.
I say, what? 52? That's every week? And I said, that's right. Sometimes we may double up to give our staff a chance to take a vacation.
The
over
holidays.
Christmas and July 4th and Thanksgiving. But we do a fresh show every week, so people do not see 13 weeks of shows and then 13 weeks of reruns and say, gee, that was something a long time ago. We just give them fresh bread right from the oven every week. So, hey, we want to make sure you remember to send questions in the chat during our live stream today. And if you want more visibility, send a super chat. We got moderators watching the chat for your questions, and we'll get them to as many of them as we can. But just a reminder, subscribe. It's real simple. Just touch that button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave us a comment. Also, be sure to leave us a like. Tell everybody you like us. This is a weird social media thing,
isn't it, though?
I feel like I'm in grade school. Do you like me? Yeah, do you like me? Yeah, I like you. So this is what we're doing. We want to be liked. Everybody wants to be liked. We'd love to be liked, and we'd love for you to share it with all your friends. Now, we've got a lot of topics that we have coming up. For example, we'll be talking about Joe Biden, who insults about half the American voters. We'll also find out whether Democrat Senator Tim Scott thinks he knows better how to be a conservative than conservatives do. And of course, we have our weekly Psaki bombs direct from the White House press room. Last week we had a lot of comments, and we always try to pick out our favorite comment from the week. This is from last week's live stream from Douglas Peters. Here's his comment. We have never needed the federal government to monitor our speech or anything else. We do, however, need the federal employees, including the elected ones, to be held accountable for their treasonous acts and total disregard of their oaths of office. Protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
It's a good word.
Quote. Good quote for sure. So I've got a question for you. We'd love for you to respond to it in the chat portion of our live stream. Here's the question. Does the leak from the Supreme Court help the Democrats in November, or does it motivate pro-life supporters? Be sure and leave your answers in the chat and in the comment section below. All right, we got a lot of clips to get to, and we want to start with this one. First of all, this is kind of interesting because Jen Psaki is saying that Joe Biden really wants to work with Republicans. Let's watch.
Now, at the same time, he's always believed that in working with Republicans in good faith and finding ways to do that. And he will continue to do that.
I'm sure he will. But it's kind of interesting. Jen Psaki said he really wants to work with Republicans. And then almost like the same day, Joe Biden goes to the podium and insults the very people he claims he wants to work with. Watch this one.
Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
That's a pretty big statement. First of all, he says that. He throws the shot. Then he won't take any follow-up questions. He just turns and walks away like he does, like off into the sunset. But think about what he said. This MAGA crowd. Well, that happens to represent, what, 70 million voters in America? Half the country? And his attitude is this MAGA crowd is the most extreme political movement in American history. Really, Joe? Worse than the Klan? Worse than the Night Riders? Worse than the people who bombed and tried to destroy the federal government back in the 60s, people with the Students for Democrat Society and Weather Underground groups? Really? Are you talking about they're worse than Antifa that went into major cities in the summer of 2020 and burned police cars and assaulted cops by the hundreds, if not thousands? Worse than that? simply people that happen to believe in strong borders, lower taxes, the MAGA crowd, you know, those of us who voted to put America first rather than to put some people in China first. Oh, I'm just stunned that Joe Biden thinks that that's the worst extreme political organization in American history. No wonder you walked away, Joe. You realized what you said and you thought, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said. And that's saying something, and you walked off. All right, here's another one on this MAGA crowd. So Jen Psaki is now questioned about his comment because people at least were paying attention enough, and she slides out of this one, or at least attempts to.
The MAGA crowd, as you call them today, this was almost half the people who voted in 2020. Does the president ever feel maybe there could have been he could have done more early on, trying to reach out to those people? And does the extreme rhetoric basically signal that, you know, there's no going back now, and they're sort of out of, you know, beyond the pale for him? And yeah,
I think what the president will be judged by Americans by his actions and what he does to make their lives better.
You know, Pam, before we started, your observation was you actually agree with Jen Psaki on something.
For the first time since she's been at that podium, I told the governor before we started, I said, I can't believe I agree with Jen Psaki on this, but she is exactly right. I do think that the president will be judged by Americans and ultimately by his actions.
Yeah.
So there you go. I agree, Jen.
I do too. You know, at first I was thinking, you agree with what? And then I realized what she said there, he'll be judged by his actions.
Absolutely.
And he is being judged by his actions. Every day that you go and you squeeze the handle on the pump to put gasoline in your car, I'll bet you're thinking, thanks, Joe. And when you go to the grocery stores and the prices you pay are 20% higher than they were when he took office, you're probably thinking, yep, I'm going to judge you by your actions because your policies are hurting me. And on top of that, he wants to do things that make no sense, like saying we're going to forgive all the student loan debts. And I'm thinking, okay, what about all the people that have other kinds of debts? You're going to do those too? Why just students? These are the people who, by the way, because they took out loans and got a college education, probably make a lot more than the people who didn't get a student loan and go to college. So what are you going to do for them? So you're going to say to those folks that make less money, you're going to pay for the people who make a lot more than you do, and we're going to give them a bump. And by the way, most of those are going to be upper middle class white kids. So that's brilliant. That's just brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm sure Americans will judge you by that.
Yeah, presidential math, that's what that is.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to believe. All right, we want to go to this series. This is Joe Biden, I think every now and then blurts out something that maybe he didn't realize was a moment of candor and honesty. When he says that he's a child of God. And I want you to hear this in the context of the abortion issue. Listen.
I said, I believe I have the rights that I have, not because the government gave them to me, which you believe, but because I'm just a child of God. I exist.
You know what, Joe? Just like you agreed with Jen Psaki, I think that there's some truth in that because I'm a child of God, I exist. What about the child in the womb? That person exists because he or she is a creation of God. And by the way, yesterday, Joe Biden actually called the child in the womb a child. Normally, you'll hear politicians who are pro-abortion say things like fetus, undeveloped material. They'll use all these words to try to deny that it's a human being. Once again, I think Joe Biden did not intend to say this because it really validates the idea that the unborn baby is a child. Democrats are having some challenge with this. Let me give an example. Tim Ryan is the Democrat nominee for the Senate seat in Ohio. And I guess he's trying to appeal to conservatives to preserve Roe v. Wade, but he makes one of the dumbest statements I've heard a politician make in a long time. And I hear politicians make some pretty dumb statements. Here's his.
Senator, would you have any limits on abortion?
Look, I think what we had established in Roe is something that we can continue to work with, and I think those can be the parameters. But then again, if you get rid of what was established law, which in many ways was conservative, to keep that, to appreciate stare decisis and make sure we appreciate the law, if we move away from that, you're going to get states like Ohio that have some of the most extreme laws in the whole country.
I think that could be used in college classrooms across America as evidence of when a politician has no idea what to say and he just makes words up and throws them in the blender and hopes it comes out as a smoothie. That was no smoothie. That would make you sick. And he said nothing of substance, but somehow tried to say that Roe v. Wade was a wonderful framework. Yeah, it's been brilliant. We've killed nearly 62 million unborn children since 1973 with that genius framework that should never have happened in the first place. I don't know how anyone defends that. It's beyond me. I don't know. If you think you can defend it, please send that in the chat. Love to hear from you. So Jen Psaki then asked about Joe Biden's statement where he, I guess, slipped up and called the unborn glob of tissue a child. And I don't think she had a really good answer for it. Let's watch and see.
Why is the president talking about the judgment to choose to abort a child?
Well, the president's view on a woman's right to make choices about her own health care is well known, well documented, well stated.
He said abort a child.
I understand, Peter, but what I'm telling you is what his position is.
You really aren't telling him what his position is. What you're doing is avoiding answering a very simple question. Why did Joe Biden say the unborn is a child? Because if it is a child and you kill it, didn't you kill a human being? That's the whole point of the pro-life movement. Look, I don't pretend to know everything, but it seems pretty evident that once you've determined that what's inside that mother is a person, a human being, then it changes the whole dynamic. And when she says the president wants to preserve a woman's right to choose and women's health care, this is not about women's health. There's nothing healthy about an abortion. Nothing. Nobody's health is bettered by an abortion, not even the woman who has the abortion. She's not healthier because of that. It wasn't like she had a disease or a tumor and we removed the tumor. The most natural thing in the world is for a woman to have a baby. I remember when my wife and I were expecting our first, and I would go to the doctor with her, and I'd have a big, long legal pad full of questions, and the doctor finally got tired of me showing up with questions. And he stopped and he said, look, you got to understand something. Your wife is not sick. She doesn't have a disease. She's pregnant. She's having a baby. For thousands of years of human history, this is the single most normal, natural thing that happens to a human being, and the most natural thing that happens to a woman. She has a baby. And she's not sick, and we're not here to heal her because she's not needing healing. We just basically stand by and watch God do what he does. And it was really a wake-up call to me, and I thought, never thought about it like that. But I've thought about it that way ever since. I bet we've got some questions,
Yes,
don't we?
we do. We've got a lot of participation today, so of course, plenty of time to still be part of our chat today, so make sure you like us and share it with your friends so they can be part of the conversation today. All right, a couple of shout-outs first. Jet Ison says to you, will you be my Huckabee? I just think that's great. So thanks for that, Jet.
In the words of Val Kilmer on Tombstone, I'm your Huckleberry.
Well, I've got to love him because he's one of our cheerleaders. He's out there asking folks to like our stream today.
Yeah,
so
thank
thank you
you
for that. And I want to say this from Arthur. His name is Arthur OK. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good, Arthur. Thank you. And I hope you're doing good too. I love the personal ones. That's great.
Yes, me too.
I
I
really
love
do.
that. All right, we've got a little debate in the chat. Would love Gov to weigh in on it. What does the Constitution say about the separation between church and state? Here we go.
Great question. It says nothing. It says absolutely nothing. That phrase, separation of church and state, did not originate in the Constitution. If someone tells you it did, ask them to show it to you, because they can't. It's not there. It was in a letter in 1803 written by Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association of Danbury, Connecticut. Now, the letter by Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association was in response to a letter that they had sent to him because there were rumors that the country was about to adopt a state religion, an official church. And of course, Thomas Jefferson said, oh no, we don't have an official church. The position of the country is that you're free to worship however you want, to whomever you want. and we stay out of it. And that's when he invoked this phrase. He said that there is a wall of separation between the church and the state. And if you read the full letter, you can Google it and find it pretty easily. The letter basically says the church is free to be the church and say whatever it wants. And it can speak to the government, it can condemn the government. But the government is never to interfere in the life or the work of the church. Now, since the 1940s, that has all been flipped on its side. And now you have people who believe that it is the church that's supposed to shut up and not say anything about the government, but the government is more than free to tell a church when it can open, when it can close, how many people can come into the building, and that we must wear masks and socially distance, and maybe not even open at all. Folks, it is 100%, 180 degrees reversed when people say that. So anytime somebody says, what doctrine of separation of church and state, hand them a copy of the Constitution. Give them 20 minutes, 20 hours, 20 days for that matter, and say, find it, show it to me. It ain't there.
All right, thank you, Governor. SJ is asking, or commenting actually, just remember, if they pack the court, Republicans can win both houses and the presidency and then stack it more and pass a law to prevent future stacking.
Or just pack it in such a way that if you have the White House and both houses of Congress and the Democrats decide they're going to pack the court, then unpack the court and let it only be staffed with the people that you approve. That'd be, see, the problem that Democrats have, they don't think long term, they think short term. So they want their way, they're like petulant little 5-year-olds. They get down on the floor and cry and scream. And by the way, did you see Elizabeth Warren screaming her head off the other day? Oh my gosh. It was embarrassing. Yeah. And I thought, I haven't seen a tantrum like that since, you know, one of my children, when they were 5, didn't get their way and didn't get to watch the movie they wanted. It was just bizarre. But here's what I've learned. People on the left believe that they're always right, they're never wrong, and they always ought to get 100% of what they want. And if they don't get it, they throw a fit and riot in the streets. If conservatives don't get it, we say, okay, we'll fight harder next time. Now, that's a generalization, but it's pretty much the case. I want us to go to this clip. This is NBC's Stephen Kornacki, and he's showing that the Democrats are in real trouble this year because their numbers, in the terms of the number of people who are voting, dramatically down, and the number of people who are voting Republican, dramatically up. Here are the numbers from NBC.
You mentioned Ohio, and this is what Ohio looks like. Democratic turnout down 27% in their primary relative to 2018. On the Republican side, turnout up 28%. Again, very similar to that number you saw in Texas. Yep.
So that was MSNBC, or as I call them, BSNBC. But they're showing that almost by the exact same number that the Democrat voters have plummeted, the Republican voters have increased. Does not bode well for November. But having said that, don't take it for granted. We got to work real hard. We better have a clear message to sell to the American people.
Okay.
Some more questions?
Yeah, sure thing. I want to remind everybody, too, we do have a question in our chat today. Does the leak from the Supreme Court help the Dems in November or motivate the pro-life supporters? So we do have a poll going, so make sure you vote in our chat today if you can do that. Karen Haley is asking, Governor, can Congress do a Freedom of Information Act request for SCOTUS Communications and Politico about the leak?
They can ask Politico. They won't get it because the press has a protection. They don't have to give up their sources unless it's a criminal issue, and even then it's sketchy as to whether they could get it. Most of the time the courts have ruled that the government cannot compel a reporter to give up his or her notes or research or background, and that's just the way it's always been. Now, was the question, could Congress demand information?
Yeah, can Congress do the FOIA request? Yeah.
The answer is, can they request it? Yes. Will they get it? No. And the reason they won't is because there's a separation of powers issue. The courts have obviously always held that they have a separation, and they do, from the executive and the legislative branches. Now, granted that the legislative branch can subpoena certain things from the executive, but every time they do, there's a fight, a legitimate one, by the way, because we have to be careful that you don't let one branch of government interfere with the other. The founders created these three very separate, unique, and yet equal branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. And one cannot invoke itself into the activities and life of the other. Now, there is a certain oversight function. I don't want to get too complicated in this, but there's a certain oversight function that Congress has, but it cannot extend into asking for what would be confidential information. And one of the big fights that's been going on for now the last 2 years is whether Congress can demand that people who are in Donald Trump's White House must give up their phone records, must give up their personal notes to the January 6th committee. I hold that they don't have to, because it's protected executive branch material and Congress doesn't have a right to peek into it. If the courts ultimately decide they do, look for the executive branch through its investigative bodies like the FBI and the Department of Justice to start demanding to look into all the notes of members of Congress. You want to talk about a Donnybrook? It's going to happen. So the question, can they ask? Yes. Will they get anywhere? Absolutely not. And quite frankly, we better hope they can't. It would be a disaster.
Warhouse is asking, Governor, after knowing what we know from the movie 2000 Mules, what part of our government ultimately let the American people down the most in the 2020 election?
It really happened at the state level, because elections are managed at the state and local level, not the federal level. Congress, as you know, particularly the Democrats, want to get all the elections federalized. Please don't let that happen, because it means that whoever's running the national government will manipulate the elections for their own purpose. But there were many irregularities, whether it was the extension of voting hours or voting days, or how long a ballot could be mailed in and still be legitimate, even though it violated law. Those were the things. And when people said there were no evidences of any fraud, actually there were a lot of evidences of irregularity. So maybe you don't want to define that as fraud, but it was incredibly irregular and, quite frankly, in some cases, unconstitutional and highly illegal. So that's why I think we've got to be very careful when people talk about, oh, there was no fraud. I have not seen 2000 Mules yet. I plan to, but those who have seen it and told me about it said it is compelling. It's Dinesh D'Souza's latest film, and it's all about the 2020 elections. Hey, subscribe to the channel. That's why we can always be able to get to you and let you know when we're doing one of these things. Hit the notification bell, leave a like and a comment, and be sure and share it with your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, your co-workers, and perhaps even people that you know who are in county lockup. They should see it too. You know what it's time for?
I'm ready.
Sake bombs.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got this week. Well, this week was a week in which Jen Psaki got called out by no less than the Washington Post for her comment that she made at the podium the other day about Republicans and taxes.
Our focus continues to be on highlighting the fact that congressional Republicans want to raise taxes on half of Americans, squeezing the budgets of middle-class families.
That's as big a lie as she has ever told, ever. And the Washington Post gave her 3 Pinocchios for that one, which is about as high as you can get, basically saying, liar, liar, pants on fire. No, the Republicans do not want to raise taxes. They want to cut taxes. The Republicans under Donald Trump did cut taxes. They did not raise them. And for Jen Psaki to say that they want to raise taxes on middle-class families is an outrageous lie. And everyone in that press room knew it was a lie. But most of them ignored it and let it go because they're going to try to cover for her and protect her. Well, it wasn't the only bomb she dropped. Here's another one on trying to pretend that Joe Biden really wasn't paying any attention to the Supreme Court leak of those likely documents that will lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Does the president think the leaker should be punished?
Again, that's up for the Department of Justice and others to determine. What our focus is on is not getting our distracted or our eye off the ball of what is most important to people across the country here, which is not the leak and the story of the leak.
I'm sure she's not wanting to talk about the leak, but the fact is whoever leaked that breached some of the most precious walls of integrity that the Supreme Court has, which is that if you work there, particularly if you work for a justice as a law clerk, you keep your mouth shut. You might be privy to some of the goings on. Now, I actually had a person ask me this week in a radio interview that I did, but what's so wrong about the leak? Why is that such a problem? Shouldn't we have transparency? Well, maybe that sounds good, but let me tell you why it absolutely is a horrible idea. In the early processes of the Supreme Court looking at a case, they've historically always been able to have the most candid conversations among themselves about the merits of the case and what they thought. They argued, they debated, and they did it behind closed doors because they knew that they could speak their minds, maybe be proven wrong, maybe be proven right, but the point is they were free to openly express questions, doubts, concerns, or advocacy, and ultimately come to a conclusion. Many times, Supreme Court justices have been persuaded by their peers to change their initial point of view. But if you knew what their point of view was from the beginning and how they changed it and why they changed it, it might cause Supreme Court justices to never talk candidly with each other because they would be afraid that what they said and the manner in which they said it would be leaked to the public. So what it does, it has a chilling effect, meaning this, that however a justice initially looks at an issue, he's probably frozen in time by that issue unless he knows or she knows that there is complete freedom to openly discuss it. That's why it is incredibly dangerous, because this will divide the court and it will freeze the court and it will impale the court on the, really on the banner of inefficiency like nothing ever has. And it's just incredibly unfortunate. I hope the person who did the leaking will be discovered, publicly outed, criminally charged, and will never ever have a law license, be practice law, and would never be able to profit from his or her crime by writing a book or being on television and being a host, and would have to give the profits to the government for whatever gain they may have had from the activity that they participated in. It is really a serious, serious issue. So for Jen Psaki to pretend like we don't care, it's no big deal to us, just shows you how out of touch they are with the law and with reality.
Governor, respond to this. Lisa Bailey, who is also a super chatter today, thanks Lisa for that, says, my neighbor got a mail-in ballot to his house in my name.
Wow. See, that's the kind of thing that is troubling. There were a lot of people who got ballots who hadn't lived there in a long time, people who had moved to other states, but they still got a ballot in the state they no longer lived in. And then what's worse is some of those ballots got picked up by people who came and did what's known as ballot harvesting, where they just come and pick them up. How did they vote them? We don't know. And those are problematic things. So when you say there's no irregularities, well, talking about something not quite true, that would not quite be true. Let's take one more quick question.
Okay, and a real quick thing I want to throw in there too, Gov. YouTube seems to suppress our channel. We've talked about this whenever they can.
Yep.
So if you want to make sure that you see our live streams, check in each day. We have new videos up almost every day. We also run live streams most Fridays. We won't this Friday because we're here today.
Right.
But most Fridays at 1:30 Central. So just want to remind everybody of that. Jay Luther is asking, Governor, name something that hasn't been politicized.
Well, it can't be sports, because that has. Can't be entertainment, because that's been politicized. Politics is, by its nature, political. I guess in many churches, things are politicized. Maybe the one area left is cooking.
Oh. Gov, I want to make sure I share this too. Vanessa Camera wrote today, when are the puppies coming to work? Of course, they did.
Yes, they did. We brought them on the show, and it's still available online. You can see when they made their television debut. And they're pretty pepped up about it. They want to come back and do a follow-up, so I'll have to bring them another time. They're growing rapidly, And I think they've about maxed out their size, but I'd love to bring the puppies and make them the centerpiece of a live stream sometime.
Well, in
That'd
fact,
be
what
fun.
we've done, we've actually in the chat, and we'll leave it in there, the link for that particular episode,
good.
so folks can actually enjoy when the dogs joined us on set for the Huckabee show. It was lots of fun, and we'd love to have them back here on set.
Well, I'm sure they will be back. I
Yeah.
bet they will.
And they look good, too, because they're freshly groomed.
They were. They just had their very first haircuts this week, and they look pretty cool. Be sure and leave any questions you have in the comments. Of course, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We won't have a live stream next week because I'm going to be in Israel, but we want to say thanks for joining us. And by the way, don't miss the show this weekend on Huckabee. And if you're wondering, well, why would I want to watch it? What's going to be on? Here's what's going to be on.
This week on Huckabee, Coach Kennedy fights for religious freedom. Mike Rose, the story behind the story. The Robin Hood of comedy, Sean Reynolds.
Is it going to work if I'm crying when I'm doing it?
Barbecue master Myron Mixon. And Christian music icon Natalie Grant performs. Watch Huckabee on Saturday at 8, 7 Central and again on Sunday at 9, 8 Central right here on TBN.